Welcome to Sunya IS. Today I'll be taking up the next session for your Geo 300 Plus program. In the past few sessions, we have been taking some of the important topics from the perspectives unit, and deliberately I have taken the in-depth discussion for the topics from perspective because that requires an in-depth analysis, and you must know the name of thinkers and the basic concepts so that you can quote them across the answers. Today again we will take another set of important questions and which are directly asked in the previous year questions of UPSC for geography optional, or they can be asked again in the next year. So hence let's start the discussion around these set of important topics. So the first question is around the theme of humanistic geography. The question is straightforward. The question is asking you to discuss. Discuss is an open-ended theme. So whenever there is this term discuss in the questions, now the question is open-ended. You can attempt it in a manner for holistic coverage of that theme. Discuss the contributions of geographers in the development of humanistic geography. Now here there is one keyword, that is development bacho. So humanistic geography, the question is with respect to the contribution of geographers who had led to the development of this particular concept around humanistic geography. Now humanistic geography is not to be confused with the dichotomy that had emerged in the previous times, that is with respect to physical versus human geography. So some students might be confused in that. Okay. Now because the question is asking you development, again my suggestion is you can start from the time periods of antiquity, etc. Wherever there are influences in the works of geographers and the other thinkers who were talking about the central role of human in the geographical studies, bacho. Correct? So somebody was talking about geography in terms of description around the environment where he is staying. So the environment and how the environment determines the behavior of a person. There was one independent school of thought, one independent trace of the thinkers who influenced that perspective, whereas some other thinkers also started talking about the ethnocentric approach. They were more obvious to this aspect that in a location it is not only the environment, it is also the person who is located in that location, and hence the persons, the man as such, should also be given an important role in geographical studies. Hence we can trace the ethnocentric approach across the time periods of classical antiquity, which had become more prominent during the time periods when certain thinkers like Vidal, etc. had more prominently focused on that. And later on we see that these traces, they were getting a bit eroded. The central role of man, that was not being acknowledged properly as had been given in the previous studies, hence a backlash in form of humanistic geography. Let's try to understand this theme. This is a very important theme. So starting somewhere from 40s, majorly carried till 60s, when there was a peak, this time period was associated with the quantitative revolution. To be more precise, let's say mid 1940s although we see the traces of positivism in earlier works also. Now here there was a backlash. Why? Because quantitative revolution phase, it treated man as rational economic man. So the first backlash was that man here is taken as a rational economic man. He is a maximizer who will try to maximize the benefits out of his decisions. Okay, so hence man is treated as a rational economic man. These are the concepts which were derived from this time period. Another important concept here was with respect to the backlash of treating the geographical space geometrically. What does this mean? That means that spatial analysis had become the most important concept during this time period. We were trying to formulate the laws around the geographical space. So we were giving it a geographical interpretation in terms of geometric analysis. So to simplify it, let's understand if this is the space that we are talking about. We are trying to understand it with the help of the spatial analysis. Now the first apprehension is that, does man not belong to the space? क्या यहाँ पे लोग नहीं रहते? Does man belong or does not belong to this space? Yes, man is an integral part of this space. Once we are trying to geometrically analyze this physical space, then we are not taking into consideration the human ingenuity, the behavior perception of man on the basis of which this geographical space can be analyzed. बच्चों, इस बात को ध्यान से समझेंगे. So for example, when we were talking about certain theories, these are the concepts which might seem a bit typical, but please listen very carefully. You will understand every part of it and it will become very interesting for you to integrate them in your answers. So we are saying that, let's imagine that this is a space, okay, and we are trying to formulate a law, a geometric law for the area that is required for a classroom. Okay, so we are trying to assume how many number of students will be accommodated in the class. Then what is the purpose of that classroom? Is it required for a student who is studying in the pre-nursery school, or for students who are studying in the graduation studies, or for students who are preparing for civil services? So if the classroom is required by some coaching institute who is having a larger strength of students, then the classroom first of all should be larger in space. Okay, then what should be the breadth, the length, etc., and on the basis of which we will derive a formulation that generally whenever the classroom is required for teaching the civil services aspirants, it should be of minimum this dimension. Now please understand that classroom will be used by both the students as well as teachers. Hence, that is not only a geometric space, that is also a space which will be influenced by that particular person's behavior, both students and teacher. It is quite possible that we had accommodated chairs in a particular dimension within that particular space, but will that perception be influenced by the student's behavior? Yes. So in the quantitative revolution, the focus was more on spatial analysis. But however, humanistic geographer says, no, there will be a certain influence of the persons who are being investigated and who is investigating them. So vice versa, there will be influence in that geographical space. And hence, we must acknowledge the perception of the person while we are formulating the geographical studies. But here an important star mark has to be done in your notes. As such, humanistic geographers were not very favorable about the aspect of law making. They had said that because the human behavior, the human perception is so different from one another, we cannot generalize them in form of spatial analysis as proposed during the quantitative revolution. So these are the two basic contentions. First, treating man as rational economic and not taking into consideration the man's perception, and taking man out of the geographical space. Okay, so these were two prominent reasons for one of the backlash of the quantitative revolution that had emerged in starting from mid 1940s towards 60s. Correct? Now this backlash was in two types. One was behavioralism, another was humanistic geography. Now behavioralists, they were generally talking about taking into consideration the human's perception. However, they were also saying that we must find the commonalities in the unique behavior of each person and make laws. Whereas the humanistic geographers, they were saying that no, because how one person thinks is completely different. How he interprets a particular situation is variable from how the another person will interpret the particular situation. So there is a variability in that, and hence we cannot make generalizations or laws on that particular pattern. Bacho, I hope this is clear to you. So hence this was the reason for the development of the humanistic geography. However, this idea that man should also be taken into consideration in the geographical studies, this idea is not only novel. Okay, so this idea was also present earlier in the works of some of the thinkers like Hecataeus, Al-Masudi, etc. We also see the reference of some of the tribes by the other thinkers. Please recall the first class. Later on, prominently this was seen in the works of Comte de Buffon, okay, who acknowledged that humankind can act as an agent of change on the earth's surface. So he proposed this idea in 18th century. So humankind can act as an agent of change. This idea was also reflected in the works of Plato. So somehow when we are acknowledging that humankind can act as an agent of change, that means that man is taken into consideration in the geographical studies. However, still the dichotomies had to come and still they had to be resolved. So this idea was a very initial one. Okay. So Immanuel Kant later on, Immanuel Kant also gives this idea, okay, developed this idea that physical space that was essentially anthropocentric in nature and content. And he says that world as perceived by the inner senses, how we perceive the world by our inner senses, okay, that is by soul, sile, he gives this term sile, or mensch, man, while as perceived by the outer senses was the nature. Understood? Now another prominent work that is proposed by Karl Ritter, okay, so he was adopting the Kant's anthropocentric approach, Okay, that was adopted by Karl Ritter, and we again see traces of this particular aspect of human being central in the physical studies. Okay, here we are still not talking prominently about any dichotomies as such. Okay, so Kant and then Ritter. Okay, so Adekunde was geography, was the element of reciprocity that it believed to have existed between the natural phenomena and humanity. Okay, so this is clear to you. Then later on, even in the works of Ratzel, please understand, when we are talking about this dichotomy of determinism versus possibilism, so you associate Ratzel with the deterministic school of thought. However, there were two volumes published of Ratzel, volume 1 and volume 2. So in volume 1, his ideas were more concerned around this dimension of how nature influences man. And in the part 2, the idea was also around how man influences nature. And that was volume 2, which had subsequently influenced the works of Vidal. However, when we talk about Ratzel's works, there are also traces. He talks about the evolution of the human society through different stages. And hence, he gives different terms for those different stages. And from the time periods of nomadism towards the more settled agriculture, etc., how the agriculture later on diversifies. So we can clearly see that here and in other works also, he talks about the anthropocentrism. Okay, so it is more about determinism in a context that how nature influences man, that was more prominent in his Anthropogeography 1. But because Anthropogeography 1, volume 1, that was more famous, okay, that volume was more famous, and hence he was always attached only with the deterministic school of thought. Okay, so as per Ratzel, in his Anthropogeography, set a framework for the systematic study of human geography later on, which was carried forward in the French school of thought also. Now, prominently developed in the French school of thought, the concept that man acts as an agent of change. Man can modify his nature, and man, through his imprints, can modify the environment around which they are residing. The man can modify that particular landscape. Okay, so hence these ideas were taken up by Vidal de la Blache, that is, man by his genre de vie, that is, his ways of life. Leaves imprints. And modifies the landscape. So hence he is talking about how the ways of life can modify a particular landscape. Okay, so these are the small areas of study for Vidal, which are also the pace. Then subsequently these ideas were taken up by Bruns, okay, which became prominent across the French school of thought. So here we see the anthropocentrism becoming more prominent, bacho. Okay, then Carlos Saur proposed this in his landscape paradigm, that is how the natural landscapes, they are converted into the cultural landscapes. Okay, so this idea of cultural landscapes became very important. Why? Because that was also carrying a certain aspect of how the landscapes might have evolved during a certain period of time. Understood? So is it a static landscape? No. The landscape must have evolved over a period of time, and hence it also carries the imprints of human beings. So these ideas, you see that there has been a gradual evaluation, Okay, that is starting from, let's say, the German school. Okay, the roots, you see that some of the roots, they had started from the works, like let's say with respect to Ratzel, and later on prominently we associate the French school of thought, later on taken up by the American school of thought. Okay, so hence the traces will be quantitative revolution and the spatial analysis, the backlash in form of critical revolution in 1960s, late 1960s and 1970s, in which humanistic geography, it was prominently talking about the antithesis with respect to the behavioral geography. So it became antithetical to it because it was against gross generalizations and positivism. In behavioral aspects, we are talking about positivism. So here we were talking about positivism in behavioral school. But the disillusionment was generally with the approach that man is rational and economic. But in the humanistic geography, now we are talking about the antithesis. That is, geography should not be about gross generalizations. It should take into consideration man and his behavior. And that should be the central theme of the geographical studies. Okay. So hence criticism against positivist approach and spatial tradition of geography. So it focused on human awareness, human consciousness, human agency, human creativity, etc., which is away from geometric determinism. Okay, I hope that this term is clear to you now. Determinism can be used in variable aspects. One can be environmental determinism, where environment plays a prominent role on the man's activities. Similarly, we can derive the term geometric determinism. Okay, I hope this is clear to you. So there were different works. Okay, there were different works through which the humanistic geography, it had become prominent. So contributions. By works of Kirk, Yifu Tuan, then Annie Butimer, now in humanistic geography, we are saying that man has to be given a central role in geographical studies. Okay. So, hence we must acknowledge human awareness, human creativity, human agency, etc. Now, there are certain themes which emerge in the humanistic geography. What are those themes? First is the idea that this human it has a certain belongingness to the place of its residence, even true with respect to the animals. So, for example, if you have a pet dog or a pet cat, or for that matter of fact, any pet animal, if they are used to sitting in one particular space in your room or in your home, they are very particular about it. They will not let anybody else sit there. Okay, that is just another example. Similarly, the person who has been living in that place attaches a sense of belongingness to that place and they protect that place. So, this idea of belongingness, that is the special bond that the person shares with that particular place, that is the term given as topohila. Okay, you can use these terms in your answers. There are other concepts also. For example, there was another concept with respect to crowding. So, whenever there is crowding around a person, then his subjective interpretations, they are impacted because his thought process, that is impacted. So, whenever a person needs to generate his creativity, his own ideas, he needs isolation away from the crowded places. And that is also very general for you also, isn't it so? Because you are preparing for civil services examination, either you require a separate room in your house, or you have come here in Rajendra Nagar and you are sitting in library isolatedly. If there are so many people around you making noise, then you are not able to study. Okay, so crowding also impacts that particular person. Okay, and so what we are aiming towards, we are aiming towards a person's creativity, a person's behavior, how it will influence that particular space. So hence the central role of man in the geographical studies. But very importantly, we will come to another discussion in this context, that is the idea proposed by Goelke, the philosophy of idealism. It says that we must focus on what humans as decision makers believed in and not why they believed in. So if we are making a decision, so that should be linked with what is the decision and not why the decision has been made. For example, if you have decided to make a small settlement of your own, you are building your own house now, but you want a very small house. You are not in favor of a big bungalow, even though you are having large amount of money. What does that mean? That means there is some reason associated with it, which is the why. But humanistic geographer says we must not go into why, because it is a variable. Why you want this is completely different from why somebody else would want it. You want a small house, that's it. What people believed in, that is the context of the geographical studies, and not why they believed in it. As per Relf, the idea of phenomenology, okay, that there can be no objective world without the human existence. So this is the objective world as it is. So as per phenomenology, this objective world is not complete without human existence. Hence, taking into consideration the subjectivity of each individual, going into the minds of the people, verse 10. So these were the terms which are proposed by humanistic geographer, verse 10. Verse 10 means going inside the mind of the individual and trying to project that, how the person thinks, but that is variable from one person to another. Is that really possible? No. Okay. These were also the reasons why humanistic geography could never become an independent school of thought, because of these vague subjective criteria. Now, as per Kirk, a phenomenal environment that included everything on this planet. Okay. The behavioral environment that was the perceived and experienced part of the former. So there are two types of environment. One is the phenomenal environment, which also includes everything on this planet, whereas there is a second environment, that is the behavioral environment, that will include the perception part, what is perceived and how it is experienced by an individual, which will include the behavior and perception of the phenomenal world. Okay. Now, what are the themes? Geographical knowledge. So, geographical knowledge is a basic necessity, and that is also utilized not only by humans but also by plants and animals. So, the idea with respect to a particular place, that becomes important here. Okay. So, the concept of territory and place, crowding and privacy. So, privacy is required for developing the human ingenuity, and the idea of livelihoods and economics. So, these are the central themes which developed in the humanistic geography, okay, which starts from somewhere around 70s. You can demarcate this now in the pages of the book. Okay. I hope that you all have R.D. Dikshit by now. R.D. Dikshit is an important book which you will not buy as per your own perception. This is a book that you will have to purchase. It's not that if you perceive that I don't require it, I will not buy it. You will have to purchase it. Okay. So, this is R.D. Dikshit. This is an objective reality which we cannot negate. So, you need this not as per your interpretation, but you will require it. Page number 159 pe bachcho, there is a good discussion around humanistic geography, and this chapter, that is chapter number 6. So, it has discussions starting from the time period of resolution of the dichotomy of regional versus systematic, and from here on we start the discussions around behavioral persuasion, moving towards behavioralism and down the humanistic geography. Okay. So, there were two types of behavioral studies. First paragraph, okay, the empirical studies oriented towards deriving theories of spatial behavior, which are the behavioral studies, and the second one was the humanistic orientation. Okay. So, here the environment to the decision makers was identified as the humanistic geography. Okay. Now, second paragraph, third line, the scientific goals of replicable and verifiable measurements were generally discarded in favor of emphasis on understanding the world as seen through the eyes of individual. How I think the world is. My subjectivity is completely variable from another person, okay, whose behavior was under investigation. Hence, humanistic geography therefore may be defined as an approach to human geography which is distinguished by the central and active role it accorded to human awareness, agency and creativity. As per Buttimer, understanding meaning, value and human significance of live events. Bachcho, the easiest way to include geography in your answers is by quoting the name of thinkers. Now, we have talked about so many thinkers in the previous 3-4 classes. Please try to integrate them in your answers. An expensive view of what humans person is and can do. Yifu okay. So, it is also considered as an antithesis to behavioralism. Okay. Now, okay, you can read with respect to the approaches on page number 162. Okay, idealism and phenomenology, etc. It has been covered this in the first 2 paragraphs of 162. Now, please come to page number 163. Last paragraph. Yifu Tuan coined the term Tofo Helang to describe the effective bond that develops between people and the place. The concept couples sentiment with place, the emotions with the place, and is closely akin to the Wright's concept of geosophy. Okay. So, hence Topohila concentrates on the study of places as carriers of emotionally charged feelings and as perceived symbols. Now, bachcho, whenever you are talking about, let's say, the discussion around the challenges to tribal problems, okay, so there are certain challenges which have been faced by the tribals as such, and one of them is out migration, and that is also associated with multiple reasons. Here you can use this term tofohila, okay, that effective bond between the tribes that is eroded over a period of time. Now page 167, okay, last paragraph, contributions. First point, it initiated discussions of human agency, anticipating a central theme in theoretical discourse of the 1980s. So starting from the time period when we had resolved this debate around regional versus systematic, so from that time period it was being viewed that the central theme in geographical studies is more around model making, and hence the prominent role of human behavior, humans as such, that had been negated. So here it reinstated that aspect. Secondly, in its depiction of particularity of place, landscape and region, hence again it is more like re-establishing the importance of local differences or geographical contingency. Can we say that it is somewhere in lines with the regional approach, okay? But however, it encountered great skepticism in 70s when featureless space, the isotropic plane were postulates of much theoretical geography, okay? We had already gone above this debate of the isotropic surface, the rational economic man, etc. later on. However, it was acknowledged that we need theoretical aspects around the geographical concepts. Then third contribution was the elimination of fact-value dichotomy, alerting the researchers of the irrevocable value basis of their work. Then fourth, it had given an emphasis on value, meaning and place had proven fertile ground for the view of culture and cultural landscapes. The ideas which had become important somewhere in 20s and 30s were now again becoming important. However, last paragraph, it had been an oversimplification of distinctiveness and Habermas called it the autonomy of the segments and subjectivity and experience as a virtual fetish separated from the context and material life, okay, which is hardly the case in reality. Clear ekdam? Okay? So this is how you can attempt this particular question. Now let's move to the discussion of the next question. The next question is around another very important theme, bachcho. At the end of the discussion of this question, we will again discuss where you can integrate this theme. So you will understand the applicability part also. Radicalism is seen as a major paradigm shift in geography. Examine its causes and significance. 20 marks. Now it may seem to be a simple question, but here you have to justify some other aspects which will give you the traces of the evolution of different paradigms. Now see, here the question is that radicalism, I will explain you this term, is seen as a major paradigm shift in geography. Examine its causes and significance. Now bachcho, please understand that when we are talking about the different paradigms in geography, first of all, what do we mean by paradigms is that something which has led to initiation of a new idea itself. Now please understand it in this manner. Something which is more revolutionary in thought, something which has got to do something which is different from the previous thought itself. So can we see different thoughts emerging in the geographical studies? Yes. So we can also say that some of the thoughts were an attachment to the previous thoughts, whereas some thoughts were a complete deviation from the previous thoughts, which becomes the paradigm. Let's try to understand that. First of all, when we talk about the advent of the quantitative revolution, are we talking about positivism here? Yes. When we are talking about positivism here, that means we are also indicating about lawmaking, a general indication that we are talking about the spatial analysis or locational analysis. Now, when we talk about behavioralism, was it a backlash? Yes. But was it talking about positivism? Yes. It was only against the idea of rational economic man. So, hence, although it was a backlash, however, it was more an attachment to it. It was not suggesting any particular revolution that was apart from the quantitative revolution. So it was not revolutionary in aspect, it was basically an attachment to it. Hence, when we talk about behavioralism, it is more like an attachment to quantitative revolution rather than being a separate revolution in itself. Okay, I would want you to go through few pages. Okay, पेज नंबर 157 बच्चों. Behavioralism in geography, evolution or revolution. Through the 1960s, it had been generally asserted that geography was experiencing a second revolution, the behavioral revolution, which was expected to bring about a major transformation. However, any expectations of revolution were at the best premature, because instead what has taken place has been a gradual emergence and consolidation, very important term, double underline, consolidation of a set of approaches which had already existed. We were only consolidating them, that aimed to increase the scope of geographical explanation by seeking a fuller understanding of the processes that underpin the real world behavior, but we are still trying to explain it with the help of the laws. Their development certainly represents a significant milestone in geographical thought, but hardly anything that constitutes of the revolutions. Okay, in a fundamental sense, behavioral approach in human geography is a point of view rather than a rigorous paradigm. So it did not bring away any revolution away from the spatial science paradigm of the QR phase, but it became an attachment to it. So hence it did not represent any radical break from the past. It was business as usual. Okay, so I hope that this first dimension is clear to you. Okay, so hence it was more of an attachment to the quantitative revolution paradigm, and as such we cannot call behavioralism as a separate revolution, hardly any stuff of which revolutions are made. Whereas when we talk about radicalism now, we are saying that this is a separate, paradigm. Why is it so? Why we are saying so? Let's try to understand that. Now the earlier focus